Welcome to a Dual Digest podcast where two friends dive deep into the topics that matter.
From technology and AI to science, history, and global trends, we break down complex ideas and make them easy to understand.
Whether you're here for insights, entertainment, or just some good conversation, we've got you covered.
Just remember, stay curious, question everything, and keep exploring the world around you. And remember, every great conversation starts with a curious mind. Let's explore together.
Make sure to follow and subscribe.
Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Excited to be here.
Today we're going to be talking about Black Swan events.
Oh, yeah.
And we've got a great stack of excerpts from Nassim Taleb's book, The Black Swan.
The impact of the highly improbable.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you sent over some really interesting articles and things too, and I think this is going to be a good one.
Yeah, it's a really thought-provoking topic. Forces you to kind of look at the world a little bit differently.
It does.
After you learn about this stuff.
Yeah, so I guess maybe the first thing we should do is try to define what a Black Swan event actually is. And Taleb lays out three main characteristics.
Right.
The first one is that these events are unpredictable.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not talking about like the normal risks that you can calculate or plan for.
Totally. Like outside the realm of what we think could happen.
Exactly. These are things that truly come out of left field.
Exactly. And because of that, I think that kind of leads into the second characteristic, which is they tend to have a massive impact.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I always think about it not as like ripples in a pond, but like tsunamis, right? They can reshape industries or like topple economies.
Oh, yeah.
Or shift the course of history.
Like huge consequences.
Huge.
Yeah. Okay. So unpredictable and huge consequences.
Right.
But then the third characteristic, I think, is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. The third one is like, so after a Black Swan event happens, we humans love to try to make sense of it.
Yeah.
Right. So we like create these stories and explanations that make it seem almost predictable in hindsight.
Right. Yeah. Like we love a good story, even if it means twisting the facts a little bit to fit a narrative.
Totally.
But I feel like that almost makes us more vulnerable.
Oh, absolutely.
Future Black Swans.
Because you feel like, oh, okay, we understand this now.
Right.
So we've kind of tamed randomness. When in reality, we're just scratching the surface. And I think that's why it's so important to really look at how we misunderstand randomness itself.
Okay.
Because I think that's where the real insights lie.
So I guess what you're saying is that this whole deep dive is really about challenging our assumptions about how we view the world.
It's about recognizing the limits of our predictive abilities and hopefully giving you, the listener, a healthy dose of what Taleb calls skeptical empiricism.
I love that.
Right. So we have to look at the data, but we also have to be wary of our own biases in the stories we tell ourselves.
Okay. I'm ready to get skeptical.
All right, let's do it.
Where should we start?
Well, Taleb starts with his really great way of dissecting one of the most fundamental ways that we approach the world.
Okay.
Induction.
Okay.
And he does it with this story he calls the turkey problem.
Ooh, I remember this one. This is the one where the turkey's living on the farm, right?
Yes.
And he's like living the good life, getting fed every day, 365 days a year.
Yeah, life is good.
Yeah, and the turkey's thinking, hey, this is how it's always going to be.
Yeah, this is it.
Life is good.
Yeah.
And then Thanksgiving rolls around.
Exactly.
Bam!
Yeah, the past means nothing.
That turkey's whole worldview is just like shattered.
It all goes out the window.
It's like, poof. Gone.
Gone. And I think it's a really powerful way to show just how easily we project past patterns onto the future.
Oh, for sure. And it's not just turkeys, obviously.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, think about like even historical events. Think about World War II. Like Europe had decades of relative peace beforehand.
Yep.
And people really thought, I mean, even experts, right, thought that that was just going to continue.
Yeah, like we've figured it out.
Yeah, exactly. And then, boom, the world explodes in conflict.
Exactly.
It's a brutal reminder that even decades of consistent data can be completely overturned by a single Black Swan event.
And it happens in the financial markets all the time.
Yeah.
Traders use complex models loaded with historical data.
Right.
And then a crash hits. Some crisis emerges that those models said was practically impossible.
Right. So it's like the question is, how do we avoid being that turkey? How do we overcome that tendency to just project the past onto the future?
Right. And I think that's where skeptical empiricism comes in. It's about, instead of clinging to what we think we know, we need to shift our focus to what we don't know.
Okay.
To really accept the limits of our knowledge and embrace the vastness of the unknown.
So be a little more humble about our theories.
Yes.
Not get too attached to one way of seeing things.
Exactly, exactly. And I think that kind of brings us to another really important point,
Yeah.
which is the idea that negative evidence, so the stuff that disproves our theories,
Yeah.
is way more powerful than confirmation.
Yes. That's what Taleb calls the asymmetry of knowledge.
Okay.
Even if you've been observing white swans for years, a single black swan can completely overturn your understanding of swans.
Yeah.
Right? One piece of disconfirming evidence can outweigh a mountain of confirming evidence. It makes me think of that Sherlock Holmes quote, when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
Yes.
We need to be more willing to look for those improbable truths.
And I think it's so easy to overvalue confirmation, right? Because it feels good.
Yeah.
It reinforces our existing beliefs. But the real insights, the ones that can protect us from black swans, often come from the evidence that challenges us, that forces us to reconsider what we thought we knew.
So it's almost like instead of seeking out evidence that supports our beliefs,
Right?
we should be seeking out evidence that might contradict them.
Exactly.
That's a tough mental shift.
It is. It is. But it's essential for navigating a world where black swans are lurking around every corner.
Okay, so we've talked about the problem of induction,
Yes.
the asymmetry of knowledge, and both of those things are really pointing to how our brains kind of cling to familiar patterns.
Yeah, they do.
What else do we need to be aware of?
Well, another big one is, we love stories.
Oh, yeah.
Taleb calls this the narrative fallacy. And I think it's something we're all susceptible to.
Oh, yeah.
We crave narratives, they help us make sense of the world, but they can also really distort our understanding of it, especially when it comes to rare events.
So are you saying that the stories we tell ourselves can actually make us blind to the possibility of black swans?
Exactly. Think about how the news works. They're constantly trying to weave stories around events. They need to find the why behind everything.
Yeah.
But oftentimes, those stories are just that stories. They simplify things. They prioritize a neat narrative over, the messy, unpredictable reality.
Right, and we eat it up.
Oh, we love it.
Because we want that sense of order, of understanding.
Totally.
But it can actually make us less prepared for when things don't fit the narrative.
Right. A good example of this is what Taleb calls the Central Park mugging anecdote.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine you hear about this, horrific mugging in Central Park. It's all over the news. Everyone's talking about it.
Yeah.
And naturally, you start to feel scared, walking through the park, even in broad daylight.
Oh, yeah, I totally get that. One bad story and suddenly the whole park feels dangerous.
Right.
But statistically, wouldn't that be just a tiny blip?
Exactly.
At the grand scheme of things, especially in a city as big as New York.
Exactly. But the narrative, fueled by fear and media attention, creates this perception of danger that's way out of proportion to the actual risk.
So this narrative fallacy, it's not just about intellectual mistakes or whatever. It actually has consequences.
Real-world consequences for how we behave.
Yeah.
The choices we make.
Totally. Okay, so we've got to be aware of those seductive narratives.
Yes.
Especially the ones that play on our fears or, confirm our biases. It's about taking a step back, looking at the data, and accepting that reality is often more complex than any story we can tell about.
For sure. And I think this next one is especially relevant to anyone who works with data or models, even informally.
Okay.
It's what Taleb calls the ludic fallacy.
Okay.
And essentially it's this, it's the mistake of confusing the neat, contained randomness of games and models with the messy, chaotic randomness of real life.
Oh, so it's we're trying to impose order on a world that oftentimes defies order.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And he tells this fascinating anecdote about a casino symposium where all these experts got together and they were discussing the casino's vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
And these are people with fancy risk models, years of experience, the whole 9 yards. And they thought they had everything figured out, every possible scenario accounted for.
Until something happened that completely threw their models out the window.
You got it. A tiger that had been performing in the casino's main show for years suddenly attacked its handler.
Wow.
Total Black Swan event. And nobody, not even with all their sophisticated calculations, had predicted it.
Wow. It's a good reminder that reality always has the potential to surprise us. That's a curveball.
Yeah, and I think it highlights a flaw in how we often approach uncertainty, right? We try to tame it, control it, fit it into a box.
Yeah.
But the kind of randomness that generates Black Swan events,
it
just doesn't play by our rules.
So, if we can't control these events or predict them,
Right.
what can we do? Like, how do we even begin to make decisions in a world where, the unexpected is the norm?
I think it starts by accepting the limitations of our models.
Okay.
Recognizing that there's this vast realm of possibilities lie outside our current understanding.
Yeah.
We can't eliminate uncertainty.
Yeah.
But we can prepare for it. We can build resilience, flexibility, and develop like a healthy respect for the unknown.
Okay, so we're starting to see how the way we think about randomness can really set us up for failure.
It can.
But what about the tools that we use? I mean, are there any specific tools that Taleb criticizes for understanding and managing risk?
There's one in particular, the Gaussian bell curve, which he calls a great intellectual fraud.
Wow, strong words.
Yeah.
So for people who aren't familiar, can you just quickly explain what the Gaussian bell curve is?
Yeah, so the bell curve, or normal distribution,
Yeah.
is this statistical concept that has become so commonplace
Right.
that we almost mistake it for reality itself.
Yeah.
It's that familiar bell shape you see when you're plotting things like height
Okay.
or IQ scores,
Yeah.
where most data points cluster around the average and extreme deviations are rare.
Right, right. And it's a really useful tool in a lot of contexts. So why does he call it a fraud?
Because he argues that its overuse, especially in fields like finance and economics,
Okay.
creates this dangerous illusion of predictability.
I see.
It leads us to believe that most events will fall neatly around the average,
Right.
and that those extreme outliers, the Black Swan events, are so unlikely we can practically ignore them.
But as we've seen, the world is full of those fat tail events, right?
Exactly.
The ones that fall far outside the bell curve's predictions.
Exactly.
And those are often the events that have the biggest impact.
Right, and to kind of illustrate this, Taleb draws this distinction between mediocristan and extremistan.
Okay.
So mediocristan is where the bell curve reigns supreme.
Okay.
Think of things like height and weight, where averages dominate.
Yeah.
But extremistan is where rare events have outsized consequences.
Okay. So things like wealth distribution
Yes.
or the impact of a pandemic
That's right.
would be more in the realm of extremistan.
Yeah, exactly. And in those realms, the bell curve just isn't an adequate tool for understanding and managing risk.
Right.
It lulls us into a false sense of security, making us underestimate the likelihood and potential impact of those fat tail events.
Okay, so if we're gonna ditch the bell curve
Right.
when it's not appropriate,
When it's not,
what do we replace it with?
that's where fractals come in.
Oh, okay.
They offer this more realistic
Yeah.
and nuanced model for understanding complex systems, especially those that are prone to these black swan events.
So fractals, these are the trippy, self-similar patterns
Yes.
you see in nature, like
Yes.
snowflakes.
Snowflakes, coastlines.
Yeah. How do those apply to something like, financial markets?
Well, think about it. Markets are made up of individuals
Right.
making decisions.
Yeah.
And those decisions influence other decisions.
Right.
It's this complex, interconnected system.
Yeah.
And like those natural fractals,
Yeah.
there's a pattern that repeats itself at different scales.
Okay.
So a small fluctuation can trigger a larger one,
Okay.
which can trigger an even larger one.
So those big crashes and booms, they're not just random noise. There's actually structure to them.
Exactly. Taleb actually highlights the work of Benoit Mandelbrot,
Oh, yeah.
who was a pioneer in fractal geometry.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually applied these concepts to finance. And what he showed was that those fluctuations weren't random.
Okay.
There are these fractal patterns that could actually help us understand the dynamics of these boom and bust cycles.
That's pretty amazing. So, I mean, fractals give us this whole new lens for seeing those hidden connections, right? For understanding how these seemingly small events can cascade into much larger ones.
Exactly, exactly. And it reminds us that the world is far more complex
Yeah.
and interconnected
Yeah.
than the bell curve would suggest.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, but I want to make sure that we touch on this other really crucial concept that Taleb brings up, which is silent evidence.
Yes.
I think this is one of the most thought-provoking ideas in his book.
Yeah, I agree.
Because it forces us to confront how much we don't see, how much information is actually missing from the picture,
Right.
especially when we're trying to understand the past.
It's like the things that didn't happen.
Right.
Right? Like we tend to focus on what's survived, what's been recorded,
Yeah.
what's made it into the history books.
Yeah.
But that can create a very biased view of reality. Totally. Taleb uses this great analogy. He compares cities to little Giacomo Casanovas.
Okay.
Right? So a Casanova might boast about his countless conquests.
Yeah.
But we never hear about the times he was rejected, right?
Right. We only see the successes.
The survivors.
Yeah.
And it's the same with cities. We see the ones that have thrived for centuries,
Yeah.
but we forget about all the settlements that failed, the ones that, like, disappeared without a trace.
Their stories are lost to time.
Lost.
So we're left with this, like, very skewed perspective, this illusion of stability.
Right.
We assume that because something has lapsed for a long time, it must be inherently resilient, but we're not seeing the whole picture.
Exactly. Exactly.
It makes me think about, like, successful entrepreneurs, right? We often attribute their success to talent and hard work.
Sure.
But what about the role of luck? What about all the entrepreneurs who had just as much talent and drive but didn't make it? You never hear their stories.
Right. We're missing that silent evidence, all the factors that contributed to both success and failure.
Right.
And that's a dangerous blind spot, especially when we try to learn from the past or make decisions about the future.
So it's not just about looking at what is, it's about thinking about what isn't.
Yes.
What's missing, what we might be overlooking.
Exactly. And I think that awareness should make us more humble,
Yeah.
more cautious,
Right.
more open to the possibility that our understanding of the world is always incomplete.
Okay, so we've talked about the limits of our models, the biases in our thinking, and the importance of considering silent evidence. But it all sounds kind of, I don't know, depressing. Like, if we can't predict black swans and we're constantly surrounded by uncertainty,
Right.
how do we even begin to make decisions?
I think that's where Taleb's work gets really practical, right? He's not saying that we should just throw our hands up and give in to chaos.
Right.
It's about shifting our focus from prediction to preparation.
So instead of trying to, like, foresee every possible black swan event,
Yeah,
we should be more focused on managing the consequences.
exactly. We can't control the unpredictable,
Right.
but we can control how we respond to it.
Okay.
We can build robustness, adaptability,
Yeah.
create systems that can withstand those unexpected shocks.
I like that. It's
Yep.
empowering. It hits us back in the driver's seat, even in a world that feels increasingly chaotic.
Exactly. You know, think of it like designing a building in an earthquake zone. You can't predict when or where the next earthquake will hit, but you can design a structure that can withstand it.
Okay, yeah, that's a great analogy. So what are some, like, specific strategies
Yeah.
for building that kind of resilience, both in our lives and in the systems that we create?
Well, one strategy that Taleb really advocates for is the barbell approach.
Okay.
And it's this idea of combining extreme risk aversion in some areas with extreme risk-taking in others.
That sounds counterintuitive. Can you explain that?
Sure, imagine like, a barbell with weights on each end.
Okay.
On one end, you have your core, your foundation. This is where you want to be extremely conservative, protecting yourself from, like, catastrophic losses.
Okay, so minimizing your downside risk.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's the risk aversion side of things.
Exactly.
What about the other end of the barbell?
That's where you embrace uncertainty. That's where you're experimenting freely.
Okay.
And you're seeking out opportunities for asymmetric payoffs.
Okay.
Think high-risk, high-reward scenarios. But the key is to limit your downside exposure in these ventures.
Okay.
You're not betting the farm on any single outcome.
So it's about balancing stability and exploration, playing it safe in some areas while taking calculated risks in others.
Exactly. So the barbell strategy kind of helps us navigate a world of black swans by acknowledging that, we can't eliminate uncertainty,
Right.
but we can manage its impact.
Yeah.
We can diversify our exposures
Okay.
and create buffers against potential losses.
This is a really practical way to think about it. So are there any other, like, key takeaways from Taleb's work that can help us, build resilience and thrive in a world of black swans?
Yeah, absolutely. He really emphasizes the importance of being a skeptical empiricist, meaning, we ground our decisions in real-world observations,
Okay.
constantly testing our assumptions, and being open to changing our minds when presented with new evidence.
So having that, like, intellectual humility, that
Yes.
willingness to admit when we're wrong.
Exactly, exactly. And I think it ties into the idea of lifelong learning, right?
Yeah.
In a world that's constantly throwing us curveballs,
Right.
the ability to adapt,
Yeah.
to learn, to evolve is crucial.
That makes a lot of sense, but it also sounds like a lot of work. Always questioning, always adapting. Is there a way to, like, make this approach to life feel a little less daunting?
There is, and it comes down to embracing something that Taleb calls optionality, and it's about creating choices, keeping our options open, and avoiding rigid plans that could be shattered by those black swans.
So instead of trying to predict the future, we should just focus on creating as many possibilities as we can.
Exactly. Optionality is about having the flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances, to seize unexpected opportunities, and to pivot when necessary.
Okay.
It's like having multiple backup plans.
Right.
So you're not caught off guard by unforeseen events.
I can see how that would be incredibly valuable in a world of constant surprises. Can you give us like a real-world example
Yeah,
of how someone might cultivate this optionality?
sure. Think about someone who's building a career.
Yeah,
Instead of locking themselves into one specific path,
yeah,
they might develop like a diverse skill set or build relationships in different industries
yeah,
or cultivate a reputation for being adaptable and open to new challenges.
yeah,
That way, even if their industry is disrupted or their current job disappears,
yeah.
they have the options and the skills to pivot to something else.
So it's about maximizing our freedom of action, creating a wider range of possibilities for ourselves,
Exactly.
and being open to the serendipity of life.
Exactly. And that brings us to another really important point. It's not just about mitigating the negative impact of black swans.
Right.
It's also about positioning ourselves to benefit from the positive ones.
Oh, that's interesting. So we should be thinking about how to harness the power of like
Yes,
unexpected good fortune.
exactly. Exactly. And that requires a certain mindset,
Okay.
a willingness to embrace uncertainty, a curiosity about the unknown, and this belief that even in the face of chaos, there's always this potential for growth, for discovery, and yes, even for joy.
That's a really powerful way to think about it. But a lot of what we've been talking about feels pretty individualistic, you know? Like it's about how I, as a single person, can make better decisions, be more resilient. But what about the larger systems we live in, like our institutions, our economies, our governments? Are those susceptible to black swans too?
Absolutely. In fact, Taleb argues that a lot of our systems are actually more vulnerable to black swan events,
Really?
precisely because they try so hard to ignore them.
Huh.
They're built on this assumption of order and predictability,
Yeah.
on models that fail to capture the true complexity and randomness of the world.
And you see this play out in a lot of different areas, right? Like
Yeah.
from financial crises to political upheavals, even like technological disruptions.
Exactly. A prime example that Taleb uses is the 2008 financial crisis.
Okay.
Remember, in the lead-up to the crisis, a lot of experts were convinced that the financial system was stable.
Right.
They had it all under control. They had their
Right.
sophisticated models, their risk management strategies, their stress tests.
Right.
But all of those things were based on a flawed understanding of risk,
Yeah.
on an assumption of normality that just didn't reflect reality.
So they were essentially blind to the possibility of a black swan event, even though in hindsight it seems almost inevitable.
Right? It wasn't just a failure of prediction.
Yeah.
It was a failure of imagination.
Wow.
They couldn't even conceive of the kind of crisis that ultimately unfolded
Right.
because their models had effectively excluded it
Yeah.
from the realm of possibility.
That's a sobering thought. So if our systems are so fragile,
Right.
what can we do to make them more resilient, to like black swan proof them, so to speak?
Well, there's no easy fix, but Taleb offers some really interesting ideas.
Okay.
One key principle is decentralization.
Okay.
He argues that concentrated systems, whether it's a financial system that's dominated by a few megabanks,
Right.
or a political system where power is concentrated in the hands of a small elite,
Yeah.
are inherently fragile.
Okay.
They create these single points of failure
Yeah.
where a black swan event can cascade through the entire system
Right.
and cause widespread damage.
So it's like the old saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. Decentralized systems, on the other hand, are more adaptable
Okay.
and resilient. Think about like a network of small, interconnected businesses as opposed to a single, giant corporation.
Yeah.
If one part of the network is disrupted,
Right.
the other parts can adapt and keep functioning.
It's like the difference between um, a massive tree that can be toppled by a storm
Yes.
and a forest that can weather that same storm because it's made up of many interconnected trees.
That's a great analogy.
Okay, so decentralization is one.
Yeah.
What else?
Another one is redundancy.
Okay.
In a lot of our systems, we strive for efficiency, for eliminating waste,
Right.
optimizing every process. But oftentimes, this comes at the expense of redundancy,
Okay.
of having backup systems
Right.
or alternative pathways.
So make things more efficient,
Yeah.
but also more brittle.
Exactly. It's like if you build a bridge with only one support beam,
Right.
it might look sleek and efficient,
Yeah.
but if that one beam fails,
Right.
the whole bridge collapses. So redundancy might seem inefficient in the short term,
Yeah.
but it's essential for long-term resilience.
Okay. So decentralization, redundancy.
hmm
Any other kind of key ingredients to building more black swan-proof systems?
I think one more that's really crucial is skin in the game.
Okay.
It's this idea that people who are making decisions
Yeah.
should have a personal stake in the outcomes of those decisions.
Okay.
If they benefit from a risky bet that pays off,
Yeah.
they should also bear the costs if that bet goes sour.
So it's about aligning incentives and accountability, making
Yes.
sure people are thinking about the long-term consequences of their actions, not just the short-term gains.
Exactly, exactly. Skin in the game is a really powerful motivator for prudence
Yeah.
and responsible decision-making. It forces people to consider the potential downside risks,
Right.
not just the potential upside rewards.
This makes me think about the whole debate around like regulating certain industries, especially finance.
Right.
There's often this argument that too much regulation stifles innovation and growth. But it seems like the absence of regulation, the lack of skin in the game for
Right.
people making these risky bets,
Right.
can actually lead to even bigger problems down the road.
That's a great point. It's a complex issue,
Yeah.
but I think Taleb's concept of skin in the game offers a really valuable framework for thinking about regulation, accountability,
Yeah.
and the distribution of risk and reward in any system.
It's a good reminder that we're all interconnected, right? And that the decisions that are made by individuals, institutions, can have these far-reaching consequences, both positive and negative.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to the individual level.
Yeah.
You know, even if we can't single-handedly redesign our institutions or rewrite the rules of the game,
Right.
we can still apply Taleb's ideas to our own lives,
Okay.
to how we think,
Yeah.
how we make decisions,
Yeah.
and how we navigate a world that's increasingly defined by uncertainty.
So what are some key takeaways, like for the individual?
hmm
The person who's just trying to live a more Black Swan-aware life.
Well, we already talked about the importance of being a skeptical empiricist, right?
Yeah.
Constantly testing our assumptions, being open to revising our beliefs in the face of new evidence.
Yeah.
That's essential in a world where black swans are constantly challenging our understanding of how things work.
It's about staying curious, staying adaptable,
Yeah.
and being willing to let go of outdated ideas.
Exactly. Taleb also encourages us to cultivate a sense of what he calls anti-fragility.
Okay, that's one we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah.
What does it mean to be antifragile?
So it's about going beyond resilience,
Okay.
beyond simply bouncing back from setbacks. It's about actually getting stronger,
Okay.
growing from adversity, thriving in the face of chaos. You know, a resilient system can withstand shocks,
Yeah.
but an anti-fragile system actually benefits from them.
So it's not just about surviving black swans, it's about using them as opportunities for growth
Yes.
and transformation.
Exactly. Think about how our muscles work. When we lift weights, we're actually creating these tiny tears in the muscle fibers.
Right.
But the body repairs those tears, making the muscle stronger in the process. That's anti-fragility in action.
Wow, that's a great way to visualize it. So how can we apply this concept to our own lives?
Yeah.
How do we become more anti-fragile in a world that feels increasingly chaotic and unpredictable?
I think it starts with a shift in mindset.
Okay.
It's about embracing uncertainty,
Yeah.
accepting that failure is not the opposite of success.
Okay.
It's part of the process.
Right.
It's about experimenting, taking risks, and learning from our mistakes.
It sounds like it takes a lot of courage
It does.
to kind of step outside our comfort zones
Yeah.
and embrace the unknown.
It does, but I think it also brings a sense of freedom
Okay.
and empowerment. You know, when you realize that you can actually benefit from the unexpected,
Yeah.
that you can grow from adversity.
Mm-hmm.
It changes your whole perspective. It allows you to see challenges as opportunities to find meaning and purpose in the midst of chaos.
That's a really inspiring message, and it's a great way to wrap up our deep dive into the Black Swan. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the limits of our models to the importance of decentralization, redundancy, and skin in the game in building more resilient systems. We talked about how we can become more anti-fragile in our own lives, embracing uncertainty, using it as fuel for growth and transformation.
It's been a fascinating conversation.
It has.
And hopefully, it's given you some new tools and perspectives for navigating a world that's constantly throwing us curveballs.
That's right. And remember, in a world of infinite possibilities, the unexpected is not something to fear, it's something to embrace. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep exploring.
Make sure to follow and subscribe.